Forgotten 5-minute breakfasts were too delicious to forget, so why did they vanish? These quick meals once fueled busy mornings with thrift, comfort, and warmth. What made us leave behind the very foods that carried us through the day? Oatmeal with molasses was one of those breakfasts that carried families through the morning without any unnecessary effort or wasted time. Before instant oatmeal packets with added sugars and artificial flavors crowded grocery shelves, most households relied on simple rolled oats boiled on the stove with a drizzle of molasses for sweetness. It was hearty, thick, and carried a distinct richness that set it apart from lighter maple syrup. Families appreciated it because molasses was inexpensive, widely available, and often already stocked in pantries for baking, canning, or preserving. A bowl of oats simmering on the stove, then served steaming with molasses poured across the top, was comforting in a way that stuck with people. It was more than just fuel. It was tied to thrift, resourcefulness, and home. Kids sometimes complained about the strong flavor, but mothers knew it filled them quickly and lasted until lunchtime. Workers heading to long shifts also leaned on it, since oats were dependable and molasses did not spoil easily. It was simple, practical, and strong. Forgotten today, oatmeal with molasses remains one of those breakfasts that deserves a return to the table for both comfort and memory. Cottage fried potatoes with eggs came from kitchens that wasted nothing, making sure even cold leftovers found a second life. Potatoes from last night's dinner would be sliced thin and tossed into a skillet with butter or meat drippings, crisping up golden within minutes. As the potatoes sizzled, eggs were cracked directly into the pan, frying in the same fat while soaking up the flavor. It was filling, inexpensive, and fast, the type of breakfast a farmhand or factory worker could eat before a demanding day. Children loved the crispy edges, while adults valued how quickly it came together on busy mornings. This was not a delicate breakfast. It was heavy, rustic, and designed to push hunger away until midday. Families in the mid-century leaned on meals like this, stretching what they had and avoiding waste. Potatoes were cheap and easy to grow, and eggs were staples few homes lacked. Together, they created a classic plate that has slipped away over time. Today, packaged breakfasts dominate, but nothing was quicker than frying potatoes and cracking an egg. Toast with apple butter was once a farmhouse staple that carried the warmth of autumn into cold mornings. Bread, often baked the day before, would be toasted on a skillet or under a broiler, then generously slathered with apple butter. Unlike jam, apple butter offered depth. Slow-cooked apples flavored with cinnamon, cloves, and sugar until thick and spreadable. For rural families, it was nearly free, since apples were plentiful and preserving them was a yearly task. Families spent entire days in autumn boiling pots of apples into apple butter, canning jars that would last throughout the winter. On frosty mornings, few things felt as comforting as warm toast with spiced apple butter melting into its surface. The flavor was rich, wholesome, and tied directly to the land outside the kitchen. Children grew up associating its smell with safety, family, and the rhythms of the farm. Today, processed spreads dominate shelves, but jars of apple butter still carry that old flavor of memory. It deserves a comeback, reminding us of when mornings began with something sweet, simple, and homemade. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches were once the quick, dependable breakfasts that carried children through school mornings. Long before energy bars and drive-through meals became common, parents spread peanut butter on slices of bread, drizzled honey on top, and wrapped them in paper within minutes. The combination was sticky, sweet, and protein-rich, making it both quick and nourishing. For many households, honey was easier to keep than jelly and paired perfectly with the earthy taste of peanut butter. Children often ate these sandwiches in the car, on the bus, or even walking to school, showing convenience foods were nothing new. It was the kind of breakfast that took under 5 minutes to prepare, but still felt indulgent compared to plain toast. Parents liked it because it kept energy steady through long mornings without needing a hot stove or heavy cleanup. Over time, advertising for cereal pushed it aside, framing sandwiches as lunch only. Yet those who grew up in the mid-century remember mornings that began with peanut butter and honey. Forgotten today, it once embodied the idea that the simplest meals were often the best. Leftover pie for breakfast was once common enough that nobody batted an eye. In the 1950s, when dessert pies were baked at home regularly, there was often a slice or two left on the counter by morning. Instead of wasting it, people happily ate it cold with coffee or milk. A slice of apple pie or pumpkin pie was filling, quick, and made mornings feel special even when money was tight. Kids loved it because it blurred the line between breakfast and treat, while adults saw it as practical since it used up leftovers. It was especially common after holidays when kitchens overflowed with pies, but the tradition stretched into everyday life as well. At a time before strict rules about healthy breakfasts, pie was just another way to start the day. Even workmen heading out early might grab a wedge on the way to the job, knowing it would keep them full until lunch. It was not about indulgence as much as it was about convenience and resourcefulness. Today, the idea seems strange, but back then it was normal. Leftover pie for breakfast was proof that sometimes the quickest solution was also the most satisfying. Cheese and crackers as breakfast may sound more like a snack today, but in many homes it was a simple stand-in when mornings were rushed. A small plate of cheddar cubes with butter crackers was quick to prepare and surprisingly filling. It was cheap, portable, and could be eaten in minutes, making it perfect for busy families in the mid-century. Housewives appreciated it because it required no cooking, just a quick slice of cheese from the block and a few crackers stacked on a plate. Kids liked the salty crunch, and parents knew the protein gave them enough energy to get through school. In rural towns where dairy was abundant, cheese was a constant presence on the table. Crackers stretched the meal further, making it both economical and convenient. Before sugary cereals dominated the breakfast market, this was the kind of quick plate that felt just fine to serve in a pinch. People did not think twice about replacing eggs or toast with cheese and crackers when time was short. It may not have looked glamorous, but it was one of those breakfasts that quietly kept families moving. Forgotten now, it was once a common, no-nonsense choice. Quick rice pudding cups were a way to turn cold leftovers into a comforting breakfast in minutes. When families had leftover rice from dinner, mothers would reheat it in milk with sugar, raisins, and cinnamon until it became creamy. The result was a warm, sweet dish that could be eaten straight from the pot or poured into cups for the children. It was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and felt like a treat, even though it was made from scraps. Kids loved the raisins and spice, and adults enjoyed how filling it was without being heavy. Rice was cheap and kept well, which made this dish a dependable fallback whenever mornings were rushed. Instead of throwing out leftovers, people turned them into something delicious that carried them through the day. It was practical but comforting, proof of how resourceful home cooks were in mid-century America. Over time, convenience cereals replaced it, but many still remember a bowl of warm rice pudding as a childhood favorite. Today, it is rare to see rice pudding served at breakfast, but it once held a proud place at the table. Quick, sweet, and hearty, it was too delicious to truly deserve being forgotten. Soft boiled eggs in egg cups were once the picture of a wholesome morning meal. Eggs would be simmered gently until the whites were set, but the yolks remained golden and runny. Each egg was served upright in a small cup, with the top cracked open and toast strips called soldiers used for dipping. It was a breakfast beloved by children who found the dipping fun and parents who appreciated its speed and nutrition. Boiling an egg took only minutes, and bread was already on hand in every kitchen. This was the sort of breakfast that felt elegant and homely at the same time, especially with decorative egg cups on the table. Many homes had them as part of everyday dishware, a detail that has faded from modern life. Soft-boiled eggs were not just quick, they carried a sense of tradition, teaching children simple table manners while still being playful. They were practical, delicious, and endlessly repeatable. Today, egg cups are more of a novelty, but once they were an ordinary sight in American homes. It is one of those small, simple breakfasts that lingers in memory for the warmth it brought to the start of the day. Cottage cheese on toast with jam might sound unusual today, but it was once seen as a healthy and filling option. A slice of toast would be spread with cottage cheese for protein, then topped with a spoonful of jam for sweetness. It balanced savory and sweet in a way that appealed to both adults and children. For households watching their budget, cottage cheese was affordable and versatile, often purchased in large tubs that needed to be used up quickly. This made it a logical choice for mornings when eggs or meat were too expensive or unavailable. The jam added color and flavor, often homemade from backyard fruit or bought cheaply at the market. Together, it was a 5-minute breakfast that felt modern and sensible at the time. People praised it for being light yet satisfying, and it became a regular in cookbooks that promoted practical eating. Over the years, cottage cheese lost its popularity, but at the time it symbolized a balanced breakfast. Forgotten now, it remains a reminder that simplicity can taste just as good as more elaborate meals. Quick, frugal, and wholesome, it was the kind of breakfast that worked for everyone. Shredded wheat with warm milk was the original convenience breakfast before sugary cereals came along. Large wheat biscuits, plain and unflavored, were placed in a bowl and doused with steaming milk until they softened. The result was hearty, filling, and simple, a far cry from the frosted cereals that would later dominate grocery aisles. Parents liked it because it had no frills but plenty of nutrition, and children ate it because it was what was served. Shredded wheat kept for ages in the pantry, making it reliable for mornings when fresh bread or eggs were scarce. The warmth of the milk softened the dense biscuits, turning them into a porridge-like meal within minutes. It was especially comforting in winter when kitchens were cold and families needed something hearty before heading out. Generations grew up with shredded wheat as their daily start, long before colorful mascots made cereal exciting. Though plain, it carried the kind of comfort that lingers in memory, tied to mornings spent at the family table. Today, it has mostly been forgotten, replaced by sugary options that promise more excitement but less nourishment. Still, it was once the backbone of quick American breakfasts. Butter and sugar sandwiches were born out of hard times, but somehow managed to become a treasured memory for many children. During the Depression and even into the 40s, families who could not afford much turned to the simplest ingredients they had on hand. A slice of bread was spread with butter, then dusted with a spoonful of sugar before being folded in half or eaten open-faced. It was quick, it was cheap, and it was sweet enough to make a child smile before school. Parents liked it because it was fast and cost practically nothing compared to buying jam or meat. The crunch of the sugar against the softness of the bread made it oddly satisfying, even though it was plain. Some families toasted the bread first, giving the butter a chance to melt into the surface and hold the sugar in place. Others simply spread it cold and handed it off on a plate. While nutritionists today might recoil at the thought, for many it was a taste of childhood happiness during lean years. It filled bellies just enough and brought a bit of joy to mornings that were often otherwise bleak. Tomato juice and crackers may sound unusual as breakfast today, but in the 40s and 50s, it was considered both quick and healthy. Housewives who were short on time often poured a small glass of tomato juice and paired it with a few buttered crackers to serve their families. Tomato juice had been marketed heavily as a vitamin-packed drink, especially after World War II, when people were urged to eat and drink more vegetables. It was easy to find in cans and lasted much longer than fresh produce. Crackers added some bulk, giving the meal enough substance to get through the morning without much cost or effort. Children may have preferred sweeter foods, but many adults thought of this pairing as modern and sensible. Some families even sprinkled celery salt into the juice to give it more flavor, making it taste closer to a cocktail without the alcohol. It was also considered lighter than eggs or meats, which appealed to people concerned with digestion. Forgotten now, it was once an everyday solution for households trying to balance speed, nutrition, and affordability. It may not have been glamorous, but it certainly served its purpose. Baked beans on toast was a dish borrowed straight from British kitchens, but firmly embraced by Americans in the mid-century. Families discovered that canned baked beans, already seasoned and ready to heat, could be quickly spooned over toasted bread for a hot meal in under 5 minutes. It was cheap, filling, and surprisingly comforting, combining the sweetness of the beans with the crunch of toast. This dish became especially popular in working-class homes where money was tight and mornings were busy. Kids enjoyed the sticky beans, and parents appreciated that it was protein-rich without requiring expensive meat. Sometimes grated cheese was melted on top for extra richness, but even plain, it was more than enough to start the day. It also appealed to those who wanted variety beyond the usual eggs and oatmeal. Cooks liked it because it required no real skill, just heat the beans, toast the bread, and breakfast was ready. Though often forgotten now, baked beans on toast carried a sense of thrift and practicality that defined the meals of that era. It showed how international influences quietly reshaped American breakfast traditions in ways that are rarely remembered today. Avocado toast may feel like a trendy 21st century invention, but its roots go back much further. In California during the mid-century, avocados were abundant and often mashed onto slices of bread for a quick, fresh breakfast. Families growing avocados in their backyards knew the fruit was too good to waste, so it was eaten at nearly every meal. Toasted bread with mashed avocado was simple, nutritious, and fast to prepare, long before cafes made it fashionable. Some sprinkled salt and pepper on top, while others added sliced tomatoes or lemon juice if available. Housewives saw it as a modern choice, light but full of healthy fat that kept energy levels steady. In some households, children grew up thinking avocado toast was completely ordinary, only to realize later that it was unusual elsewhere. The spread was creamy and filling, and its natural richness made it taste indulgent without costing much. Forgotten for decades, it quietly lived on in California kitchens until its recent comeback. Back then, though, it was never about style. It was simply about using what was plentiful. What seems trendy now was once a humble, everyday breakfast that many families loved. Cereal with evaporated milk was a quick solution when fresh milk was scarce, especially in the 40s and 50s. Families often kept cans of evaporated milk in their pantry because it lasted for months without refrigeration. When mornings came and no fresh milk was available, the can was opened, mixed with water, and poured over cereal. The result was richer and creamier than fresh milk, giving even plain cereal a more indulgent taste. Children did not mind, and parents relied on it to stretch the grocery budget. Evaporated milk was cheaper than regular milk and could be stored in bulk, which made it a practical choice for rural homes or households with limited refrigeration. Sometimes the cereal was even eaten with undiluted evaporated milk for extra richness, though it made the dish very heavy. This practice was so common that many grew up associating the flavor with childhood. Today, people rarely think of using canned milk on cereal, but for decades it was the standard. It shows how resourceful families were, turning simple pantry staples into a breakfast that was both fast and satisfying. Forgotten now, it deserves to be remembered for its place in American kitchens. Maple syrup over cornmeal mush was one of the most comforting breakfasts for families who needed something hearty but quick. Cornmeal mush was simply cornmeal boiled in water until thick, then poured into bowls steaming hot. It was cheap, filling, and ready in minutes, which made it a favorite among rural households. To sweeten it, maple syrup was drizzled on top, creating a balance between earthy grains and sugary richness. Families who lived near maple-producing regions often had syrup on hand, but even store-bought versions were considered worth the cost. Children loved the sticky sweetness, and adults appreciated how much energy it provided for the day ahead. Cornmeal was inexpensive and easy to store, so it became a staple during the Depression and remained common afterward. Unlike oatmeal, mush had a heavier texture, which many found more satisfying. The combination with maple syrup elevated it from plain sustenance to something memorable. Over time, it was replaced by boxed cereals and other convenience foods, but those who ate it never forgot the taste. It was proof that simple ingredients, prepared with care, could still feel special. Forgotten now, it once defined American mornings in countless homes. Saltines with butter and jelly may sound like an odd substitute for breakfast bread, but in many homes it was the quickest choice. When loaves of bread ran out or were too expensive, families reached for boxes of saltine crackers. Spread with a bit of butter and topped with jelly, they created small, open-faced bites that could be eaten in minutes. It was inexpensive, required no cooking, and worked well for children rushing off to school. Mothers liked it because it kept little hands busy and made use of pantry staples that were always around. Sometimes the butter was skipped, and jelly alone was spread on top, though the butter gave more richness. The salty cracker combined with sweet jam created a flavor that was surprisingly satisfying despite its simplicity. It was not glamorous, but it got the job done when budgets were tight and mornings were hectic. Forgotten now, it once served as a reminder that resourcefulness was as important as taste. For many, this quick plate of crackers felt every bit as good as toast when times were lean. It deserves to be remembered as one of those simple yet clever stand-ins. Fruit cocktail cups were once considered a modern and cheerful way to start the morning. Canned fruit cocktail was popular in the 40s and 50s, marketed as an easy way to bring sweetness and vitamins to the table. Housewives would quickly open a can, spoon the fruit into small dishes, and sometimes add a dollop of cream or whipped topping. The mix of peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries made the breakfast colorful and appealing to children. Parents liked it because it was inexpensive, shelf-stable, and felt like a healthier alternative to pastries or fried foods. It was fast, ready in under 5 minutes, and required almost no cleanup, which made it especially appealing during busy school mornings. While fresh fruit was not always available, canned versions were reliable and could be stocked in bulk. Some families even sprinkled a little sugar on top for extra sweetness, though the syrup from the can was usually enough. Forgotten today, fruit cocktail cups once symbolized progress, convenience, and a little bit of indulgence. They were a way of brightening up the breakfast table without much effort at all. It was proof that canned goods could feel surprisingly festive. Sausage patties with syrup were one of the quickest hot breakfasts you could make in a mid-century kitchen. Frozen sausage patties were common by the 50s, and they could be fried up in a skillet in just a few minutes. Families often served them with a drizzle of syrup, combining savory and sweet in a way that felt indulgent. Children loved the sticky sweetness clinging to the salty meat, and adults enjoyed how satisfying it was. It gave the comfort of a hot breakfast without requiring eggs or other time-consuming dishes. Pancakes were not always an option on weekdays, but sausage patties with syrup gave a similar sense of indulgence. The dish also reflected the growing popularity of frozen foods, which made it easier for busy households to serve something hearty. Forgotten now, it was once an everyday favorite, especially in families where mornings were rushed, but people still wanted something warm. It captured the mid-century idea that convenience and comfort could go hand in hand. A plate of sizzling sausage with syrup poured on top was quick, filling, and delicious, and it deserves to be remembered. Milk toast was once a Depression-era standby that carried into the 40s as an easy breakfast. Bread was toasted, broken into pieces, and placed in a bowl, then softened with warm milk poured over the top. A sprinkle of sugar finished it, creating something gentle, sweet, and filling. For families struggling to make ends meet, it was a way to stretch limited ingredients into a comforting meal. Children often ate it before school, and adults appreciated how quickly it came together. The warm milk softened the bread into a texture similar to pudding, which made it easy to eat even for the very young or elderly. Some people added cinnamon or nutmeg for extra flavor when they had it, but even plain, it was beloved. Nutrition was not the focus. It was about using what you had and making sure nobody went hungry. Over time, it fell out of fashion as more modern breakfast foods became available. Today it sounds old-fashioned, but for many it is remembered with fondness. Milk toast may be forgotten, but it once represented comfort and frugality at the American table. Cold meat sandwiches were one of the most practical breakfasts of the mid-century. Families who had leftover ham, turkey, or roast beef from dinner the night before would simply slice it and tuck it between 2 pieces of bread. It was portable, easy, and required almost no preparation, which made it perfect for mornings when everyone was rushing. Parents appreciated that it was hearty and filling, while kids enjoyed that it felt different from the usual cereal or toast. Some families added mustard or mayonnaise if they had it, while others served it plain. The sandwich was often wrapped in wax paper so children could eat it on the way to school or take it along as a snack. It may not sound like a typical breakfast today, but back then it was perfectly normal. Forgotten now, it was once a staple of frugal kitchens that valued thrift and speed over formality. Banana and peanut butter milkshakes became popular as families sought filling and protein-rich meals that could be made in minutes. A ripe banana? a spoonful of peanut butter, and a splash of milk blended together created a creamy, thick drink that was both nutritious and indulgent. It was especially popular in households with children, since the natural sweetness of bananas covered the stronger taste of peanut butter. Parents liked it because it delivered energy and protein without requiring a stove or much cleanup. This was one of the earliest examples of a breakfast smoothie, though people did not call it that. Some added a spoonful of honey for extra sweetness, while others used powdered milk if fresh milk was unavailable. It was cheap, quick, and surprisingly modern for its time. Forgotten today, it once represented the cleverness of American kitchens in turning simple ingredients into something delicious and efficient. Instant grits with butter were a Southern favorite that spread to households across the country once quick cooking varieties appeared on shelves. All it took was boiling water or milk, stirring in the grits, and topping with butter or sometimes cheese. It was ready in minutes and filled people up without much cost. Families loved it because cornmeal was inexpensive and available year-round, making it a reliable pantry staple. For working parents, it provided a warm, comforting breakfast that could be served almost as quickly as pouring a bowl of cereal. Children often sprinkled extra salt or sugar depending on their tastes, giving it a versatility that appealed to everyone. Instant grits carried a rustic tradition into modern kitchens, bridging the gap between old farmhouse cooking and the growing demand for convenience. Forgotten now, they once defined quick weekday mornings across many homes. Brown sugar and cream on grape nuts was a clever way to make a plain, crunchy cereal softer and sweeter. Grape nuts were marketed as a health food, but on their own they were hard and not very appealing to children. Families solved that by warming milk or cream and pouring it over the cereal with a spoonful of brown sugar. The heat softened the nuggets while the sugar melted into them, creating a warm, comforting bowl that tasted far better. It was inexpensive, quick, and still felt wholesome, which appealed to parents trying to balance cost and nutrition. Grape nuts boxes were a common sight in mid-century kitchens, and this method became the preferred way of serving them. Many children who grew up eating grape nuts this way still remember the flavor fondly, even if the cereal itself has faded in popularity. Forgotten now, it was once an everyday staple that kept families full and happy. Pineapple juice with toast was once advertised as the perfect modern breakfast in the 1960s. Food companies leaned into the idea that people needed something fast, light, and efficient, rather than heavy plates of eggs and meat. A glass of canned pineapple juice alongside a slice of toast became a symbol of sleek, contemporary living. Housewives appreciated the simplicity, and children liked the sweet, tropical flavor that felt exotic compared to orange juice. Pineapples were heavily marketed during this time, thanks to improved canning and shipping that made them widely available. Toast remained the ever-reliable breakfast standby, so pairing it with juice felt both familiar and fresh. This combination was quick to serve, easy to clean up, and cheap compared to cooked meals. It may seem bare by today's standards, but back then it represented progress. Forgotten now, it once embodied the promise of convenience and modernity at the American breakfast table. Ham and cheese toasties were one of the fastest hot breakfasts you could prepare with minimal effort. All it required was slices of bread, a bit of ham, and cheese toasted together in a skillet or toaster oven. In just minutes, you had a warm, crispy sandwich that felt indulgent but was simple enough for a weekday morning. Families often made them with leftover ham, stretching a small piece into a full meal when layered with bread and melted cheese. It was especially popular among school children who enjoyed the gooey cheese and salty ham combination. Parents liked that it was cheap, filling, and mess-free. Some even wrapped toasties in foil so kids could carry them to school as breakfast on the go. While today the idea of a hot sandwich for breakfast may seem heavy, it was once a beloved and convenient option. Forgotten now, ham and cheese toasties deserve their place in breakfast history. Egg salad on toast was a thrifty and fast way to make use of leftover hard-boiled eggs. Families who had eggs from dinner the night before would mash them with mayonnaise, mustard, and a bit of seasoning. Spread over toasted bread, it created a creamy, savory breakfast that came together in minutes. It was especially common after Easter, when households had plenty of boiled eggs to use up. Parents liked it because it was cheap, full of protein, and made leftovers feel fresh again. Children enjoyed the creamy texture, though some preferred it with pickles or celery for crunch. For many, it was less about being fancy and more about being efficient. In homes where wasting food was unthinkable, egg salad on toast became a routine morning meal. Forgotten now, it once represented the kind of practical cooking that defined mid-century America. Cottage cheese with sliced radishes was one of those combinations that reflected the health food wave of the 1970s. At the time, people were turning toward lighter meals, fresh vegetables, and high-protein dairy products. A bowl of cottage cheese topped with thinly sliced radishes was quick, easy, and marketed as both modern and slimming. The peppery crunch of radishes paired surprisingly well with the creamy curds, making it a dish that appealed to adults more than children. It became popular among those trying to eat healthier without sacrificing convenience. Cottage cheese was inexpensive and widely available, while radishes were easy to grow in backyard gardens. Together, they created a breakfast that felt fresh and balanced, ready in under 5 minutes. Forgotten now, it was once a symbol of a cultural shift toward health-conscious eating in America. Quick pancake roll-ups were a clever way to make use of leftovers in the morning. Cold or day-old pancakes from the griddle would be spread with jam, peanut butter, or even honey, then rolled up like little logs. They were easy to eat by hand, making them a popular choice for children heading out the door. Parents liked that they prevented waste while also giving kids something sweet and filling. The soft pancake combined with sticky spreads made for a comforting bite that required almost no effort. In homes where pancakes were made in large batches on weekends, these roll-ups carried into the weekday routine. They were frugal, fast, and flexible, able to use whatever spreads or fillings were available. Forgotten today, they were once a beloved trick for turning leftovers into something fun and tasty. Hot cocoa with buttered rolls was the cozy winter breakfast that many children remember fondly. On cold mornings, mothers would warm a pot of milk, stir in cocoa powder and sugar, and serve it steaming in mugs. Alongside came fresh bread rolls, split open and spread with butter until they glistened. It was simple, but deeply comforting, the kind of breakfast that made children feel cared for before walking to school. Parents appreciated how inexpensive it was while still giving warmth and energy. The combination of sweet cocoa and savory rolls filled stomachs without taking long to prepare. Some families even used leftover dinner rolls, ensuring nothing was wasted. Forgotten now, it once defined winter mornings across countless American households. Peach coffee cake with crumb topping was the kind of breakfast that turned heads at church potlucks and family gatherings alike. Whether made with canned peaches or the real thing from a backyard tree, the fruit gave it a bright, syrupy flavor that soaked into the soft cake underneath. The crumb topping, made from butter, sugar, and flour, baked into a crispy golden crust that added texture and sweetness to every bite. Housewives loved it because it could be made ahead of time, sliced easily, and served warm or cold with a pot of coffee nearby. It was one of those reliable, crowd-pleasing recipes that got passed around on handwritten cards and folded into old cookbooks with floury smudges on the pages. Kids liked it because it was basically dessert for breakfast, and no one was there to stop them. The best versions were tender in the middle, loaded with peach slices, and generous with the crumb on top. It was both fancy and familiar, and in the 1950s, that combination made it a household favorite. Canned peach halves with cottage cheese was the quiet, no-cook breakfast that kept dieters, seniors, and busy families fed when time and groceries were both running low. You would grab a can of peach halves, spoon some cottage cheese in the center, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and filling enough to count, it showed up in weight loss guides, homemaker magazines, and community cookbooks promising simple, affordable meals. Parents loved it because it was fast and required no stove, and older folks leaned on it when cooking felt like too much work. It might sound odd now, but back then, canned fruit and cottage cheese were pantry staples that stretched far and kept mornings moving. Some versions added a drizzle of honey or chopped nuts, but most kept it plain, quick, and practical. It is one of those breakfasts that slipped away as frozen meals and grab-and-go options took over. But back then, it was quietly keeping families fed with nothing but a can opener and a spoon. Canned peaches over cottage cheese was the dish that blurred the line between breakfast and 1950s diet food. You would open a tin, let that sweet syrup drip, and gently plop a golden peach half on top of a scoop of cottage cheese. No cooking, no seasoning, just sweet and salty, soft and curdled. It was strangely elegant in a plastic plate sort of way. You might have seen it at church potlucks, cafeterias, or grandma's house, where the fridge always had a cold can ready to go. Cottage cheese was sold as a health food, high in protein, low in guilt. Peaches made it feel like a treat. Add a sprig of mint or a maraschino cherry, and you had something that vaguely resembled a sundae. It was also incredibly practical. No waste, no mess, and it looked prettier than it had any right to. But let us not pretend kids were lining up for it. This was adult breakfast, quiet, efficient, and undeniably retro. If you ever sat at the table pushing canned peaches around with your spoon while your parents read the paper, you are definitely part of a very specific club. But even this was nothing compared to the boldest fish-forward move of the morning. Kougall spread on toast was a quirky and delightful dish first created in the early 1970s. The dish consists of Kougall, a flavored peanut butter spread slathered on toast. Kougall came in various unique flavors like chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon, and banana, making it a playful alternative to regular peanut butter. The spread, manufactured by Kraft, became popular due to its unique and sweet flavors, which appealed to children and adults alike. The most popular flavor of Kougall spread was chocolate, which was often enjoyed as a sweet breakfast treat or snack. Kougall was discontinued in the late 1970s due to declining sales. Wheaties with warm milk and banana slices might sound painfully simple today, but in the 1950s, this was the definition of a balanced breakfast. Before we had protein bars and energy drinks, there was this: a bowl of America's favorite cereal, softened with warm milk and topped with slices of whatever fruit you had on hand, usually bananas. Warm milk was not just a cozy touch, it was a trick parents used to make breakfast feel like a hug. Bananas brought in that natural sweetness and texture, and Wheaties were advertised as the breakfast of champions for a reason. This was the meal of athletes, go-getters, and school kids with scraped knees and high hopes. Mothers believed in it, kids depended on it, and the radio jingle pretty much sealed the deal. If you grew up in the post-war years, chances are this was on your table more than once. It was not flashy, it was not rich, but it was dependable and good, qualities that mattered more than anything else back then. Apple ring pancakes were straight out of those old Betty Crocker cookbooks and Sunday church potlucks that every neighborhood seemed to have. You would slice an apple into thick rings, dip them in pancake batter, and fry them up on the griddle. The result was a warm, fluffy pancake wrapped around sweet fruit, all ready in under 10 minutes. Kids loved them because it felt like dessert for breakfast, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the fridge. Apples were easy to keep on hand. Batter came together fast, and the whole thing cost next to nothing. Some folks dusted them with powdered sugar, others kept it plain, but either way, it was a breakfast that disappeared fast. These showed up everywhere, from rural farmhouses to suburban kitchens, quietly filling plates long before frozen waffles and toaster pastries took over. It is one of those breakfasts you do not hear about anymore. But back then, it was a reliable way to start the day. It looked like chocolate milk, but it definitely did not taste like it. Carnation instant breakfast came in little single-serve packets that promised energy, nutrition, and enough vitamins to power a small army. Just mix it with milk and boom, breakfast in under 30 seconds. For kids of the 1960s and 1970s, this was practically healthy food. Parents loved it because it was quick, kids tolerated it because it was chocolate-ish, and somewhere along the way it became a cultural artifact. Back then, convenience beat taste every time. If it came in a powder and looked remotely edible, it made it onto the breakfast table. The commercials promised vitality, strong bones, and something vaguely futuristic, like breakfast had become science. It was marketed as an ideal solution for busy mornings. But let's be honest, most of us drank it while staring at the same box of stale cereal we had been ignoring all week. And if you remember drinking it straight from a foggy glass while the milk never quite mixed right, you might be older than you think. But hey, if you thought that was strange, wait until you remember the orange powder astronauts brought to breakfast. Toaster strudel, a sweet and convenient breakfast treat, first appeared in the early 1980s. This quick delight consists of flaky pastry filled with fruit or cream, toasted and topped with sweet vanilla glaze. Varieties like chocolate, cinnamon, and seasonal fruit keep it exciting. The type of icing traditionally used for toaster strudel is a sweet vanilla glaze, which adds a touch of indulgence to the crispy pastry. The treat became popular when it was embraced as an easy breakfast option by the Pillsbury Company. The brand's iconic Little Chef character helped promote toaster strudel as a fun and kid-friendly breakfast option. Toaster strudel was inspired by traditional Austrian pastries like Apfelstrudel, which were popularized in the United States by European immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Toaster strudel influenced breakfast trends, offering a quick and delicious option for busy mornings. Creamed cornmeal mush was what happened when you took one of the humblest foods around and gave it a second life on the skillet. Originally born out of necessity during the Great Depression, it never quite left American kitchens. You would cook cornmeal slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a porridge, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it chill overnight. The next morning, you would slice it into thick slabs, pan-fry them until golden, and drizzle on syrup or melted butter. Some folks even added a sprinkle of salt for balance, or cinnamon when sugar was tight. It was a breakfast that felt like a little bit of effort went a long way. Housewives liked it because it was cheap, filling, and made use of leftovers without waste. Kids liked it because it was crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and tasted like something sweet without being too heavy. No one called it gourmet, but everyone knew it worked. Cornmeal mush was honest food. No frills, no fuss, just something hot and good that stuck to your ribs. Cottage cheese on toast with pineapple rings was the kind of retro breakfast you would find tucked inside those glossy 1970s women's magazines, always advertised as light, quick, and just fancy enough to feel like you tried. You would toast a slice of bread, scoop on some cottage cheese, and crown the whole thing with a pineapple ring straight from the can. It sounds odd now, but back then it was practical, filling, and passed off as health food, sweet, salty, creamy, and done in under 10 minutes, perfect for busy mornings or when groceries were running low. Housewives loved it for its simplicity, and teenagers liked it for being something different than plain old toast. You could find versions of this popping up at brunch tables, church socials, or just in quiet kitchens trying to stretch a meal. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of new diet trends and breakfast bars, but at the time, it was a fast, no-fuss meal that worked. If you have ever stood in front of a stove flipping cornmeal slices while the rest of the house was still dark, then you already know. This was comfort food with calluses. But sometimes, breakfast took a hard left turn into the bizarre, like when eggs were not enough. So you added ketchup. There is no middle ground with ketchup on scrambled eggs. You either grew up with it or you think it is culinary heresy. But for millions of American kids, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, it was just how breakfast worked. Eggs were cheap, ketchup was everywhere. Put the two together and you had a meal that felt familiar, even if it looked like something from a preschool food fight. This was not about haute cuisine, it was about speed and taste. Kids loved it because ketchup made everything taste like a hot dog. Parents loved it because it kept the complaining to a minimum. And let us be honest, these were not fluffy French omelets. These were dry, overcooked eggs tossed in a pan until they barely held together. The ketchup gave them life. It also gave them color, which was important in a decade where most food was beige. Some folks even added it to fried eggs or egg sandwiches, claiming it just worked. And if you still do it today, no judgment. Nostalgia is powerful stuff. But ketchup was not the only flavor booster in town. Sometimes, you needed something with a bit more iron. Scrapple, a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch dish, dates back to the 17th century. It's a savory breakfast item made from pork scraps and cornmeal, formed into a loaf and fried. The dish uses specific animal parts like pork liver, heart, and trimmings, combined with cornmeal and spices, creating a unique flavor profile. Scrapple is usually fried and garnished with maple syrup or ketchup, making it versatile. Scrapple is considered one of the earliest forms of American comfort food, as it was created by German immigrants who settled in Pennsylvania. It's popular for its rich flavor and association with Pennsylvania Dutch culture. It became a regional specialty due to its resourcefulness and distinctive taste. Scrapple holds cultural significance as a testament to frugality and tradition, often served with eggs or toast. Applesauce donuts were soft little miracles that tasted like autumn and love and maybe just a little bit of nostalgia. Housewives back then were no strangers to baking in bulk, and applesauce, especially the homemade kind, was a clever way to stretch eggs, oil, and sugar in a batter. You would mix it with flour, spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, maybe a touch of clove, then fry or bake the donuts until golden and pillowy. The result was a breakfast treat that walked the line between cake and bread, sweet but not too sweet. You could roll them in sugar or just eat them warm and plain, soft on the inside and slightly crisp around the edges. These donuts were often made in big batches, stored in tins, and handed out to family, neighbors, or anyone passing through. In some homes, they were Saturday breakfast. In others, they were school lunch add-ons. Either way, they always disappeared fast. Applesauce donuts proved that you could make something comforting and shareable out of whatever you had sitting on your shelf. Cheddar grits with butter were the Southern kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when everyone still needed something hot and filling. Quick grits, a little butter, a handful of shredded cheese, and breakfast was done before you even finished your first cup of coffee. It was the kind of meal found in tattered cookbooks, handed down from grandmothers who knew how to stretch a pantry without cutting corners on comfort. These grits were creamy, cheesy, and surprisingly satisfying for something that took less than 10 minutes to whip up. You did not need fancy groceries or a stocked fridge, just the basics. It kept bellies full through school days, work shifts, or long hours in the fields. For a lot of folks, this was breakfast you ate standing up, spoon in hand, on your way out the door. Simple, cheap, and quietly comforting. Grits have stuck around in fancier forms, but this quick, everyday version has slipped through the cracks of modern cooking. Cornmeal mush was never glamorous, but slice it, fry it, and suddenly it had presence. The night before, someone would stir cornmeal into boiling water until it thickened into a gloopy, beige brick. You would pour it into a loaf pan, let it sit overnight, and by morning, you had yourself a solid chunk of survival. Slice it up, toss it into a hot skillet with bacon grease or whatever oil you could spare, and fry until the edges got crispy and golden. The inside stayed soft, kind of like polenta that had given up on being fancy. You would top it with syrup, sometimes butter, maybe even a spoonful of jam if you were feeling fancy. And yes, people called it breakfast. It was warm, filling, and made out of almost nothing, which was exactly the point. This was the food of people who could stretch a penny until it squeaked. No waste, no fuss, and no excuses. Johnny cakes, a traditional American dish, dates back to the early colonial period. They are typically enjoyed as a breakfast or side dish, offering a hearty and simple meal. The dish is made with cornmeal, water, and salt, forming a batter that is fried on a griddle. Traditionally, Johnny cakes are made with stone-ground white cornmeal, which gives them a unique texture and flavor. These cakes are cooked until golden and crisp, then served with butter, syrup, or other toppings. Johnny cakes were a staple food for Native American tribes in the Northeast, who taught European settlers how to make them from local ingredients like cornmeal. Johnny cakes became popular when they were embraced as a traditional breakfast food in New England and the southern United States. Prune whip with toast soldiers sounds like something from a children's storybook, but in the 1950s, it was as real as milk bottles on the porch. Prunes were pantry royalty back then, cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly nutritious. Housewives would stew them down until soft, whip them with egg whites or cream to to make a fluffy, pudding-like texture, and serve the result in little cups. Add toast soldiers, thin strips of buttered toast for dipping, and suddenly breakfast felt playful. This dish was especially popular for children or older folks who needed something soft, gentle, and easy to digest. But it was not just hospital food. It had charm, it had ritual, and it had a light, fruity sweetness that cut through the usual heaviness of breakfast plates. You did not need powdered sugar or cinnamon sticks. You just needed patience, a saucepan, and someone who remembered how to make it. Prune whip might be forgotten now, but back then, it was breakfast with a spoon and a little side of love. Egg in a hole was the breakfast trick every old cookbook seemed to know. Simple enough to pull off in under 10 minutes, but special enough to feel fun. You would cut a hole in the center of a slice of bread, toss it in a buttered skillet, and crack an egg right into the gap. Toasted bread, fried egg, breakfast done, fast and filling with barely any cleanup. It showed up in kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, always tucked between other quick, comforting recipes. Some folks called it toad in the hole, others sunshine toast, but it was always the same idea, a no-fuss breakfast for busy mornings. It used cheap ingredients most families already had and turned them into something that actually made the morning feel bearable. Kids loved it for the novelty, parents loved it for the speed, and nobody complained when breakfast showed up looking fun for once. It is one of those meals that quietly kept mornings moving, long before breakfast sandwiches and drive-through lines took over. Leftover pie was not a rebellion, it was a decision. A choice made in kitchens where rules were more of a suggestion and sugar was always welcome. You would open the fridge in the morning, see that lonely wedge of apple or cherry pie sitting on a plate, and suddenly breakfast made itself. No need to reheat, no shame. Just grab a fork and go. Pie for breakfast felt like getting away with something. And maybe it was. But no one questioned it because it made sense. Fruit, check. Carbs, check. A little bit of joy to start the day? Absolutely. Parents might roll their eyes, but they would take a bite too. It was efficient, especially if someone forgot to buy cereal. And let us be honest, some pies tasted better cold anyway, especially when you were too tired to toast anything and too hungry to wait. The crust would flake just enough, the filling would still hold together, and the coffee would cut right through the sweetness. Puffed wheat cereal, which was first created in the late 19th century, is a light and airy breakfast food that has been enjoyed for generations. The cereal, made from whole wheat grains, is typically enjoyed with milk or as a topping for yogurt. The process of making puffed wheat cereal involves exposing the grains to high pressure and heat, which causes them to expand and become light and crispy. Puffed wheat cereal was popularized by the Quaker Oats Company, which marketed the cereal as a healthy and nutritious breakfast option. Quaker puffed wheat was introduced in 1909 by the Quaker Oats Company, following the success of their puffed rice cereal. The cereal's unique light texture sets it apart from other breakfast cereals. In 1952, puffed wheat was one of the cereals featured in the first televised commercial for Quaker Oats, showcasing its versatility and appeal. Egg custard cups were the little breakfast miracle that came out of ration books and post-war sensibility. Eggs and milk were precious, but when you used them right, you could stretch them into something soft, sweet, and filling all at once. You would whisk up a simple mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and a pinch of nutmeg, pour it into little ceramic cups, and bake them gently until just set. No fancy tools, no need for a crust or garnish, just warmth in a cup. For kids, it was almost like dessert for breakfast. For adults, it was protein-packed fuel wrapped in comfort. Some homemakers added breadcrumbs or raisins, others kept it plain and pure, but the heart of the recipe was always the same. It was dignified, cozy, and just a little bit special. You did not need maple syrup or powdered sugar. The texture alone, smooth, light, almost wobbly, was enough to keep you coming back. If you ever find a cracked old recipe card with baked egg custard scribbled in fading blue ink, that is a treasure worth holding on to. Scrambled eggs with evaporated milk were one of those frugal breakfasts tucked inside old homemaker guides and church fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s. The secret was canned milk. You would crack your eggs, whisk in a splash of evaporated milk, and fry them up fast. The milk made them fluffy, rich, and stretch further than plain eggs alone. This mattered more than people today might think. During wartime and lean grocery weeks, a can of evaporated milk was gold. It lasted longer than fresh milk, cost less, and made ordinary eggs feel like a treat. Some families tossed in herbs or cheese if they had extra, but most kept it plain. Soft eggs with just a little salt and pepper. Quick, simple, and done in under 10 minutes. You will not find this recipe on Instagram or in trendy brunch spots, but it kept families fed and mornings moving. People used what they had, made it work, and turned humble ingredients into something satisfying. Vienna sausages were not meant to be breakfast, but try telling that to someone who grew up opening a can of them before school. They were soft, salty, vaguely meat-like tubes packed in gelatinous goo. You would slice them up and fry them with eggs, or just eat them cold if time was tight. They were cheap, shelf-stable, and wildly popular in kitchens where making do was the motto. And you could not really tell what kind of meat they were made from, probably on purpose. But if your morning started with that slippery thwop of the can opening and the smell of brine hitting the air, you knew you were not getting pancakes. It was not glamorous, but it worked. Pair it with instant coffee and maybe some toast, and you had a meal. Sort of. Vienna sausages were part of a broader trend. Breakfast that was fast, filling, and required absolutely zero questions. And for those who remember the taste, the texture, or even just the tin can, you probably remember what came next too. A cereal so sugary it needed coffee just to balance it out. German pancakes, also known as Dutch babies, are a unique breakfast dish that originated in the early 20th century. These pancakes are often topped with powdered sugar or fruit. The ingredients for German pancakes include eggs, flour, milk, and sugar, creating a batter that is poured into a hot skillet and baked in the oven. The key ingredient that gives German pancakes their distinct puffiness is eggs, which cause the batter to rise dramatically while baking. These pancakes are typically served with a squeeze of lemon and a dusting of powdered sugar, enhancing their delicate flavor. In the 1960s, Dutch babies gained popularity in California, thanks to Sunset magazine featuring the recipe in their publication. German pancakes are also commonly referred to as Dutch babies, a name popularized in the United States. Orange juice gelatin cubes were like the breakfast version of a science project, with a little bit of fun, a little bit of vitamin C, and a whole lot of jiggle. Housewives in the 1950s were always looking for new ways to make breakfast exciting, especially for kids who were not easily impressed by porridge or toast. So you would take orange juice, usually from concentrate, and mix it with gelatin to make these soft, bouncy cubes that tasted like sunshine. Served cold and cut into tidy squares, they were refreshing, colorful, and a little bit playful. Some versions added grated carrots or bits of canned pineapple, depending on what you had on hand. It was not fancy, but it felt modern, like something out of a home economics textbook. Kids loved the wobble, adults liked the vitamins, and everyone appreciated a break from the usual. Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches were one of those quiet kitchen tricks passed down from old homemaker guides, perfect for rushed mornings when the fridge looked bare, but breakfast still had to happen. You would take soft white bread, spread on a swipe of cream cheese, and finish it off with grape jelly or whatever jam was on hand. That was it. Served cold or lightly toasted, it was fast, sweet, and filling enough to count. For a lot of families, this sandwich was a saving grace on mornings when eggs were too expensive and cereal boxes were empty. Cream cheese made it creamy, the jelly brought the sweetness, and together they turned plain bread into something that actually stuck with you through the morning. You could find versions of this recipe in old community cookbooks, lunchbox ideas, and school pamphlets reminding parents how to keep breakfast simple. Somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside by granola bars and frozen breakfast sandwiches, but back then, It was a 10-minute meal that worked every time. Funny how those easy, no-fuss breakfasts slipped through the cracks. Meatloaf with ketchup for breakfast was not a treat. It was a necessity. A cold, dense slab of last night's dinner, sliced and slapped onto a plate, or sandwiched between two slices of bread if you were running late. You might add more ketchup, you might not. It depended on your tolerance for dry meat and your level of morning optimism. Meatloaf was the ultimate leftover. It held its shape, kept its flavor, and was somehow better cold. Maybe because you did not have to smell it cooking again. Maybe because you were too tired to care. There was something rugged and unapologetic about it, like you were fueling up for a day of manual labor, even if you were just headed to school. It was the kind of breakfast that made you feel tough, even if it came wrapped in a napkin. But for many households, meatloaf breakfast meant you were not going hungry. It had protein, it had carbs, and it had a taste that clung to your mouth until lunch. Kids would groan, dads would nod approvingly, and moms would say, "There's food in the fridge," like that was the end of the conversation. If you ever ate meatloaf off a paper towel while staring at the microwave and trying to decide if it was worth heating up, then you know the drill. Which of these forgotten 5-minute breakfasts would you bring back? Drop your pick in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more bites of nostalgia.